Expand our imagination.
Justification for being what you are.
Welcome to CBS Reporters Roundtable. I'm John Dickerson. It's August. This is supposed to be the vacation season. But before the president could slip away for some rest, we had a final burst of political activity. Obama hit the road on a bus tour, and the Republicans who would like to replace him reacted to the new shape of their party's nominating contest. To plot where things stand, I'm joined by Karen Tumulty of The Washington Post. Welcome, Karen. Thank you for being here. Let's start with the Republicans. In the last week, we've had a totally new shape of this race. Where do things stand now, a week after the Iowa straw poll?
Well, we have one high-profile candidate out and another one in. Tim Pawlenty left the race after a very disappointing showing in the straw poll, and Rick Perry has jumped in the pool and made a really big splash, probably more so than he wanted to.
You mentioned jumping in the pool. He actually was at poolside when he made his first a splashy remark about Ben Bernanke, saying that if the Fed chairman printed more money, that he'd get roughed up in Texas and that it was treasonous. How big of a problem do you think that is for Perry? Does it go away, or does it tell us something larger about him?
Well, that is the question. What this shows is the difference between, a candidate who's never done this before and one who has. And these are the kind of comments that probably would not have raised eyebrows at all had he said them in Texas any time over the last dozen years when he's been on the public scene there. But these are exactly the kind of comments that get a presidential candidate in trouble. And beyond that, he cast a lot of doubt on the science behind global warming theories. He suggested that evolution is just a theory out there. So, the fact that we're getting about one of these kind of comments a day is becoming worrisome for a lot of Republicans who thought this guy was their savior.
And I want to ask you, since you're from Texas, the state. A lot of people make cheap comparisons to George Bush, and when you watch him, you can't help but make those. A lot of the body language is the same, the accent is the same, but give us a sense of Rick Perry and how he may be different than George Bush for people who don't necessarily know.
Well, all you have to do is compare kind of the whole thesis of the campaign. I mean, George Bush, when he ran in 1999 and 2000, it was all about sort of shaving down, softening the partisan edges. And with Rick Perry, it is the opposite. This is a guy who comes in sort of elbows first. And, you're right, they sound alike, but what they're saying is very, very different, and their styles are very, very different.
Yeah, well, out on the trail with him this week, you're exactly right. I mean, George Bush talked about education as the new civil right, and Rick Perry said, I don't think the federal government should have any role in education. Back to the old days of sort of shutting down the Department of Education. Give me a sense of Michelle Bachmann. She was last week's news, and this week it's the Perry show. So does this change her campaign? Always it was going to be a tough hill for her to climb, but she is still the front runner in Iowa probably. What's your sense of Bachmann?
Well, Iowa is her state, but it is going to be harder and harder for her to get the kind of, her share of the sunlight because Rick Perry is really competing in very much that same space. And surprising me, to tell you the truth, because I thought he would be coming in a little more sort of as the alternative to Mitt Romney.
Right, and to the extent anybody in the Republican field is worried about Perry, it's that Romney side, the sort of establishment side, worried about whether Perry could win in a general election. Give me your sense. You mentioned that Perry's learning the lessons that usually candidates learn the first time they run. Romney's learned those lessons, and he's been pretty conservative in the way he's run this race. How do you think Romney's approaching Perry, and also where do you think he stands now in the new landscape?
Well, his people are saying they're going to just essentially lay back and see what kind of candidate Rick Perry turns out to be. And originally I was sort of skeptical. I thought they were going to have to engage him right off the bat, but it really does look like they're kind of smart to let this develop. And he, meanwhile, is trying to recover from his own most serious gaffe of the campaign, which was his statement last week in Iowa that corporations are people too.
Right. And do you think anybody else is going to get into this race? I thought we were done with the rumors about Chris Christie and Congressman Paul Ryan, and yet they persist. Do you think there's anything to them, or is this just the last remnants of a Republican Republicans being sort of unsatisfied with the field.
Well, the reporting does suggest that Paul Ryan is giving it some serious thought. And now we have yet another wave of speculation about Sarah Palin and whether she might use a September 3rd event in Iowa to decide to jump into this race. Of course, Sarah Palin, you know, what her plans are today may not be what her plans are tomorrow or even this afternoon.
Let's talk and turn to the president. He took his own political trip, although they were desperate to say that it wasn't political, but it sure looked like a political trip. And the president is going to make a speech after Labor Day about the economy. Is it possible for this president to make a big speech about the economy and anymore? I mean, because he's made so many speeches about the economy. I wonder just whether you think this punches through for him.
It's hard to see how it does. And how many times have we heard them say, and now we're going to turn to jobs. But one thing he does need to do, and with his own party, is that he came out of the debt ceiling negotiations, I think, somewhat diminished because he was seen very much as a bystander, a broker, and a lot of people in his own party were questioning, you know, what's the president's bottom line on these economic issues? And so I think as much as anything, this speech is going to be built not on expectations of things that he can actually get past, but just on once again trying to redefine, you know, what he stands for.
And he's going to continue to make this case he's been making out on the stuff about politics, saying we know what the solutions are. The White House says that some of the things he's going to propose in this Labor Day speech are going to be things that Republicans have supported in the past. And he'll say the only reason they're not supporting them now is because it's all political. Do you think there's a problem or a potential problem for the president in that 2.5 years ago he said I was going to come change politics? Well, maybe it's everybody else's fault, but he still couldn't change it. So do you see it that way?
You know, I think that does run the risk of coming off as just whining about the system. And it is a system he did promise to change, and he hasn't. So I think at this point, the election has to become two different philosophies of governing. And voters are going to have to decide, you know, one or the other is going to have to win because the process is not going to get fixed.
Do you think anything gets done when he comes back? I mean, he'll offer these things and he'll say Congress has to move quickly. He's then going to offer some proposals to this super committee. What's your sense of what the landscape looks like here in Washington when he comes back?
Well, I think there may be some things done on the margins, but the fact is that the debt ceiling deal really ties everybody's hands. Anything that costs money can't be achieved.
Last question I want to ask you about Maxine Waters, Congresswoman from California, said, you know, we support the president, we support what he's trying to do, but he's out here in Iowa with these, you know, all white audiences and not in cities and not. What do you? You know, presidents always get a lot of grief from their base, and so that's what he was getting here. But is this a real problem for the president? Does he have to deal with it? What's your sense of of the Maxine Waters comments and how the president should react?
Well, I think this goes to the question of whether particularly young and minority voters are going to be as motivated as they were last time to vote for him. You're not going to be able to fix this problem with money. So either the president has to once again address their concerns or just go heavily negative on his opponent, whoever that turns out to be, so that people are motivated less by their hope than by their fear.
That's right. Well, and the president's advisors say, you know, we can't wait till we get an opponent because then we can channel the money towards an actual person and stop having to talk about the president's record. Karen Tumulty of the Washington Post, thanks so much. And thanks all of you for joining us. Join us here each Friday at 12:30 at cbsnews.com. I'm John Dickerson. Have a good weekend.
If we don't expand our imagination,
Justification for being what you